Well, joining us for our look behind the headlines are Meredith Burgmann, who's a Labor councillor for the City of Sydney. Welcome. And Adam Creighton from the Centre for Independent Studies. Thanks very much for coming in. Well, firstly, to the issue of men in prominent positions and their sexual appetites. The two examples we're speaking of this week are the former IMF chief Dominique Strauss-Kahn and the former Californian governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Let's first hear from the former French Justice Minister on Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
What is true is that since forever Dominique Strauss-Kahn has had a reputation of a man who was really interested in women, even of someone who's a libertine.
You knew this reputation?
Yes, it is well known by everyone.
That's the former French Justice Minister. Meredith Burgmann, I wonder, how is it that a man of this stature is allowed to behave this way? I mean, I know we are preempting a court case here, but as she said, there have been other instances.
Yeah, we're certainly preempting a court case, but he obviously had form. This is a guy who, and it's not a case of consensual sex, as perhaps Bill Clinton or even Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a case of a guy who was a sexual harasser. Even if he wasn't a rapist, which is to be decided soon, he was definitely a sexual harasser, and this guy was allowed to be in charge of one of the most important world organisations. And until we develop a political culture which does not allow that sort of thing to happen, this will continue. There are men who never hear the word no in very powerful situations.
Still?
Never hear the word no in terms of their power in an organisation, and therefore can't hear the word no when women say it.
Adam Creighton, you've just written a commentary about the IMF's credibility and what its actual purpose is. But do you think the behaviour of its former chief actually speaks to the culture of the organisation?
Well, certainly for me, this scandal was a reminder of the poor judgment of the IMF. So, famously or infamously now, in 2006-2007, the organisation said that risks to the financial crisis, risks to the global economy were extremely low, which is very embarrassing, really, given what came after that. So I think the organisation does have a problem with its reputation now, and I think there'll be a lot of embarrassed people in Washington.
But does it actually speak to the person who heads the organisation?
Well, the IMF is a very large institution. I mean, it has 1,800 economists, I think, roughly work there. So, it is unfair to tar them all with the same brush of the managing director, and what he does. And also, too, in fairness, the managing director is imposed on the IMF by the major industrial powers. So I don't think the staff there really have much of a say as to who their boss is.
How do we actually learn from this incident, Meredith?
Well, I think that one of the good things about this is that all those women in his past have now come forward and talked about similar incidents. And the reason why they don't come out earlier is that they think that no one will believe them. And I think this is about women talking about sexual harassment when it happens. See, it's all very well to say, it's just alpha males that do it, but it's the sandwich shop owner who's harassing the woman who cuts the bread. This is happening daily, and it is something that women feel incredibly strongly about. I remember once when I was an academic, I asked all my women friends, some of them very senior academics, I asked, how many of you have been sexually harassed? And every single one of them had been sexually harassed at a university. And universities are meant to be the most liberal of institutions. One had been sexually harassed while she was interviewing a candidate for the new Vice-Chancellor. I mean, this is how prevalent it is.
In the case of Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was consensual sex. But it still amazes us, doesn't it, when revelations like this are revealed, and they've had a 25-year marriage with Maria Shriver. Why should we be surprised?
Well, I was just about to say, it surprises me that we are so surprised, because really politicians are just a reflection of the society that they represent, and so it does amaze me somewhat.
Except I see him as an actor, not a politician.
well, he's managed to act very well.
Sometimes in the States it's difficult to separate the two.
He's actually managed to act very well because he's managed to hide this child for so long. So, but it's. I mean, the case of Strauss-Kahn and Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think, are very, very different.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well, an Iranian woman, Armeni Barami, was disfigured and left blind when her former partner poured sulfuric acid on her after she rejected his marriage proposal. First of all, I wonder, in this age, where is the concept of blood money, an eye for an eye, Meredith Burgmann?
Look, when you look at Iran, it is a society which has this incredible, sophisticated, educated society and this really brutal medieval government. And so this is a society where they hang people from cherry pickers in public. 17-year-old girls are hung and stoned to death. This is quite a brutal society. But there are other societies that are moving away from that. In Zimbabwe, the new Minister for Reconciliation and Peace everyone's wearing a T-shirt now saying, an eye for an eye makes Zimbabwe blind.
Right.
So there is this idea that you have to change people's views of what is an appropriate punishment. But some of the people most critical of this Iranian woman are Americans who all support putting people to death by hanging. You know, this is a culture which believes in execution, and yet they see the blinding as being very barbaric, which of course it is.
And she herself says that she wants it so that other women coming after her hopefully won't have to undergo the same fate. I mean, does she have a point that there are two rules in Iran? Women get stoned, but a man gets let off. Adam Creighton?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think she does have a point. I think the important sort of point to take away from this is that there are really two issues here. There's the legal question of the eye for an eye principle in law, and then there's also the acid attacks, which is a phenomenon which is not just in Iran but actually spread all throughout South Asia.
Right, you're right about that. India, it's prevalent too.
And so the issue is, to what extent should we have a view or be able to affect Iran's legal system, the eye for an eye principle? But the cultural phenomenon of acid attacks is obviously horrific, and I think they will only go really through further economic growth and trade and just basically as these countries get more wealthy, those practices will dissipate.
Okay, well, back home, the carbon tax is always in the headlines, and of course it is again this week. The former opposition leader Malcolm Turnbull described the coalition's direct action policy as costly and something that was easy to scrap. Let's hear from him now.
If you believe that there is not going to be any global action and that the rest of the world will just say it's all too hard and we'll just, let the planet get hotter and hotter and, heaven help our future generations. If you take that rather grim, fatalistic view of the future and you want to abandon all activity, a scheme like that is easier to stop.
And that's Malcolm Turnbull there. Adam Creighton, I wonder, we've had Tony Abbott warning this week about the price of fish going up. I think he even said a box of Weet-Bix was going to go up. The government insists the carbon tax is only going to apply to less than 1,000 of the country's biggest polluters. Who are we supposed to believe in all of this?
Well, I think that there is some truth in all the statements, actually. I mean, Malcolm, I think, was just being very honest. I mean, maybe politically it was a mistake for him to be so honest, but I think he's shown since he lost the leadership that he still believes in the idea of an ETS, and occasionally he says that in public. Certainly there'll be price effects for all consumers when there's a carbon tax. I mean, whether it's a tax or an ETS, the extra cost on producers will all flow through.
But I wonder, Meredith Burgmann, this is getting really difficult for anybody to follow. Do we just stop listening until the final carbon tax comes out?
Look, I really had the carbon tax hit me when a very, very senior politician in New South Wales said to me, someone's got to explain it to me, I don't understand it. And that was when I realised that we have a real problem. And the problem, of course, for Malcolm is that Labor Party voters love him. He always tops the poll for the most preferred leader for the coalition. And the problem for Malcolm is he does tell the truth, and he has recognised that the present coalition policy if you can call it that, is really just a carbon offset scheme. It really is about saying, yes, keep polluting, and we'll use taxpayers' money to, produce carbon offsets, like, grow forests of trees and things like that. And it actually is a scheme which you can stop very quickly, whereas a carbon trading or carbon taxing scheme is much more built into the economy and is about trying to stop the carbon pollution at its source by making it expensive to happen.
But I just wonder, in the broader debate, are we getting lost in all these minute details that keep coming out, none of which will probably be in the final package? Adam Creighton.
Yeah, well, I think the government really hasn't sold their package very well, because people aren't really sort of taken up in the idea, in the overall idea of kind of, having people realise that, yes, there will be price increases, but we have to have those price increases if we're actually going to do something.
And do you think the problem is that because of this consensual approach that we have to get committees to make decisions, that all this detail is really being lost on the public?
Yeah, true. There are so many committees. There's a multi-party climate change committee, and I think that confuses people. And actually, it's not really a multi-party committee. I think it's just the Labor Party, the Greens, the Independents. So it's really only two parties. So I think people are very cynical about it. I think the irony of the debate is that it's overwhelmingly unpopular, the idea so far of a carbon tax. And so despite the fact that we're talking about it so much, I don't think it will actually happen.
Really?
Yeah, I think that you've got to go back to the election before last, where one of Kevin Rudd's winning policies was, I will sign Kyoto. And that was a very important sort of moral statement to make. And then the original emissions trading scheme goes up to the Senate, and the Greens vote against it, and that's one of the great ironies, because that emissions trading scheme was supported by the public, and it was knocked back in the Senate, and that was when the problem started, because we had to go back to square one and start talking about a tax. And once you talk about a tax, everyone opposes it. Whereas somehow an emissions trading scheme was seen as the way forward and fulfilling our Kyoto obligations. And might I say, the British Conservative Party
exactly.
is fulfilling their Kyoto obligations in a way that we can only just stand and stare and think, wow.
They've just signed up to a carbon emissions reduction scheme of 50% of 1990 levels by 2027.
Exactly.
Why do we find it so difficult here?
Well, their policy was, vote blue, go green, blue being the colour of conservatism, and people voted for them because of that. So if it's presented in the right way, it's very, very a popular policy. People want to think they're doing the right thing by their children.
Adam Creighton, just the final word?
Also, too, there's a very big difference between the aspirations to reduce emissions and what actually happens in practice. The Europeans have had an emissions trading scheme, and actually, I don't think it's worked. I think emissions have actually increased.
But you just got to make a policy, haven't you?
Yes, but it just will. But if the policy doesn't work, then it's not really worthwhile.